to let people settle down. So my name is Andy Nevin. I'm the senior planner with Jefferson County, and we're very happy to have two people from the Department of State Local Government Division, or Division of Local Government Services, to present our land use training session today. Just a couple of rules. So we're going to allow questions during and after, but we normally do an hour and a half of a presentation and then questions. So maybe save the tough ones for after or something like that. Also, when we do public gatherings now, we want to take note of the exits. So there's a couple in the back, one over here. The bathrooms are out this door, take a right, go down that corridor, then they're on your left at the end of that corridor. Let me see what else. Oh yeah, so how many of you are from towns? Okay, that's good. Probably you went out. How about villages? Okay, how about the city of Watertown? Perfect. All right, so the first presenter is Paula Gilbert. She's the training manager for local government, as I said, New York State Department of State. And Lindsay Drew is the local government specialist. They both have master's degrees. They're highly qualified to do this stuff. And I look forward to...
I don't know if my parents are great, but...
I look forward to hearing everything. You know, as soon as I do a session, then I go back and whoever I'm talking to with a town or village or the city, then I'm more qualified than I was before I attended. So I'm here as well to learn. We are recording this, so if your constituents didn't attend and they want to see it, it'll be on our website in probably a week and a half or so. And so that's an option for anyone who didn't get to come, you know, if they were busy. I think that's all I have. But again, we're very excited. Oh, I remember now. So we used to do this 4 times a year, and then for many reasons now we do it once a year. If you'd be interested in a spring session or something like that, would that be an option that you'd want to consider? You know, because there are 4 hours of required training. This is only 2, so that might be a good idea. All right. Okay. Thank you very much.
Yeah, no problem. So thank you for coming for training. I was supposed to join you last fall, but I came down with COVID for the first time. So I think you guys sat in this room and we did it from the courtesy of our own houses so we could mute and cough and that whole fun thing. So it's good to be out in Watertown. It's been a while since I've been here. But I actually have, my sister used to, and my brother-in-law were at Drum for a long time, so I actually know Watertown pretty well. Lindsay is one of our newest trainers. We've also been in a period of flux and had been down a lot of staff. I think we were 2 last summer. We're now 5, so hopefully we're gearing up to do a little bit more training, be a little bit more out on the road, seeing planning and zoning board members. By a show of hands, we already did planning board and zoning board of appeals, I think. Did we do that? Oh no, we did towns, villages, and cities. Okay, who is on their zoning board of appeals? By a show of hands. Great. And planning board? Nice. Do we have any local governing board members? Yeah, they don't need training, so it's funny, you can't really ever get them. Any code enforcement officials or zoning enforcement? Nice. The running joke in the past is you can tell by the flak jackets you wear. Great. Is anybody in their first term on their board? All right, great. So that's essentially what this course is for. It is 2 hours of, we're going to touch on a little bit of everything. It's like drinking from a fire hose. Like, we're just going to kind of run the whole land use development process in New York State. But it's really good for those new people who really need to have an idea of what they're doing on their boards. We will also have a winter webinar series in December for anybody that's looking for a little bit of extra training. So we will definitely share that with the county planners to get that out there with our local officials. And then we always do the basics, our planning board overview and zoning board of appeals overview in the first weeks of January for newly appointed members. And that's really there to either give people a refresher who've been on the board for a bit, or kind of orient new board members with what they're going to be doing in their service. So, but our division, essentially the Division of Local Government Services, is here to support New York's local officials. So we provide not only training, but technical assistance as well. So if you have questions throughout your service that you're not quite sure, or you're thinking about updating your zoning, and you kind of want to have an idea of, you know, is that going to work for us, or do other municipalities do something similar, feel free to give us a call or send us an email. We're more than happy to give you some assistance. And we can't give it to you directly. We're usually pretty good at directing people to other agencies where you might get that answer. So with that said, let's jump into it. So like I said, this one is kind of a little bit of everything. So so feel free to ask questions as we go along. So first we'll look at what the boards actually are in your municipality. Lindsay will talk a little bit about the comprehensive plan. I'll talk a little bit about zoning and some of the other regulations that you might have in your municipality. We'll talk briefly about the zoning and code enforcement official, which often is a person who wears both hats. And then we'll talk about what's important, the procedures, meetings, and hearings, which kind of are both used for both boards, so planning and zoning boards. So local government really starts with the local governing board. So the members of this board are elected, so city council, town board, village board of trustees. And they have legislative, financial, and fiduciary responsibilities, and they also have appointive responsibilities. So they adopt all of your local land use regulations. So it starts with the comprehensive plan. It's up to them to adopt it. They also then update, hopefully, your zoning code to be in compliance with your comprehensive plan. And then if you have other bits as part of your zoning, like site plan review or subdivision, those regulations are also adopted by your local governing board. They appoint you as board members, so planning and zoning board members. They also appoint the code and zoning enforcement official, and they delegate their review authority to often the planning and zoning board. Sometimes it's by statute for like subdivision, but site plan they can actually do themselves if they retain it, but a lot of times they often give it to the planning or zoning board. So New York State, we're pretty nerdy about government, and we are pretty heavy on government here in New York, shocker. But we have 62 counties, 62 cities, 933 towns, 500, and actually, I think this is wrong. I think we're at 533 now. We had one sneak in before the change, and 14 Native American reservations. So there's a lot of you to get around the state and talk to, but that's essentially what we do. All right, so the planning board starts as both regulatory and advisory powers given to them, mostly kind of spelled out in statute. And we have one more copy, I think 4 other copies must be in the room, but the one in the middle is our guide to planning and zoning laws of New York State. It's one of our more helpful ones because it kind of lists all the land use regulations that have something to do with town law, village law, general city law, general municipal law, and it kind of explains what all of those statutes actually mean. So feel free for, if somebody's new, to grab it before we leave. So advisory powers are basically kind of explained in statute. But what's cool about the planning board is their ability to advise whether they're really asked or not. So like a pesky mother-in-law, you get to kind of have your say, even if maybe your local governing board doesn't act on it, but you get to have your say. So that often plays out in the development of our comprehensive plans. By statute, they're given subdivision, the ability to do subdivision review. Then you probably may do site plan and anything else. So something like architectural review might go to the planning board, or you might be a place where you have an architectural review committee that does it as well. So depends on how you set it up in your community. They will also advise on zoning changes. In fact, when you're doing if you have a committee for zoning, at least one planning board member has to sit on it. That's the same for comprehensive plans. And then you might have an annual budget if you're lucky, that you get to kind of figure out how you go about your service on your board. So you might use that to help you hire consultants to help you through the review process. Or you might actually be offering assistance on the municipality, the governing board, applying for grants for capital projects. And then any other plans that you have. So some communities have housing plans, have been really popular since COVID just because housing's pretty expensive in most corners of the state, but recreation or open space plans. You have waterfront. A lot of times there's waterfront grant programs out there for plans about your waterfront or agricultural plans. Again, depends on what's going on in your own individual community. And then the regulatory side of the house is specifically for subdivision by state statute that is automatically given to the planning board. But a lot of times this is also site plan review, special use permits, and maybe you might oversee sign permitting in your community, or historic preservation, or architectural review. So a lot of times they kind of have a lot going on. They have kind of the pulse of a lot of the development that's happening in your community if you are a community that's seeing a lot of change. Whereas on the other side, you have the Zoning Board of Appeals, which is more quasi-judicial. So if you have zoning in New York State, you're required to have a Zoning Board of Appeals. You're also required to have a zoning enforcement officer. And the board basically is quasi-judicial. So people are appealing the decision of the zoning enforcement official to the board for relief. So that relief is done through appeals for interpretations about what something means in your code, or granting or denying use in area variances, which we'll get into in a little while. So again, you're quasi-judicial, which just means that you're kind of the buffer between the decisions of your enforcement official and applicants going to the state Supreme Court. So if you didn't have that, and the idea there is because even in a perfect world with perfect zoning that fits your entire community, there's always going to be an instance where maybe somebody just needs, it's not perfect and they need some kind of relief. So, you know, maybe somebody has an irregular lot, so they need setback relief. They would do that through an area variance. So we'll get into that in a little bit. And then, of course, planning and zoning board members, since 2007, need 4 hours of training annually. So you're here for 2 tonight. If you get more than 4, you can carry them over to New Year's. You can't share them, of course, with your fellow slackers. It is necessary for reappointment. Your governing board should be tracking your training. So a lot of times I say for, because I think everybody sometimes, you know, life is busy. I tend to tell it's a lot of times it's like your secretary who keeps tabs on this. So I say around Labor Day is a good time to tally up everybody's training and say, hey, you got 1 more quarter of the year to get stuff done. And this is why we are so busy in fall, is because everybody waits. The requirement can be waived or modified if it's by resolution of your governing board, but in the best interest of your municipality. So a lot of times that's if you have like a professional attorney or a planner on your board, they might waive training requirements for them. We don't recommend waiving it for the entire board, but again, up to your local governing board to decide. And then failure to comply with your training required doesn't actually invalidate your decisions. It just makes you ineligible for reappointment at the end of your term. Yes?
With regard to the excess hours carried over,
Yep.
is that for, like, let's say you did 12 hours. Can that only carry over 1 year? Can that carry over 2 years?
So statute's pretty silent on that, so to us, it means you can carry that on. So you probably just handle like 3 years all at once.
Okay, and then refresh my memory regarding the training that's turning snow. Is that 8 hours?
Depends on how long you spend there, but yes, usually you probably get about 7 or 8 hours probably that day.
All right, okay, thank you.
Yeah, yes.
I started partway through this year,
Mhm.
so do I have to get all 4 in this year supposedly?
I mean, preferably, yes. Again, up to your local governing board to decide.
And where else can I go besides here? There's only 2 of us, so.
Yeah, so we'll be training like 3.5 hours in Lewis County if you want to come to Loudville tomorrow night. So there's that. Tug Hill usually does training and puts a lot of stuff out there.
Is it online at all? that we can
Oh
do?
yeah, so Tug Hill Commission definitely puts a lot of like webinars on. We will also do our webinar series in December. That will definitely get out on our website, but we also share that with local officials as well. So we know people tend to wait a little bit, so we try to do 4 hours in December for anybody that's looking for the last bit.
And there are recorded sessions on our county planning department website too, that you can view.
And you get a certificate for that, or?
We can generate one, yes. Yep.
So Jefferson County, thank you.
Mhm.
I'm sorry, just to confirm. So if I view the local government videos online, that can count for training?
Yeah, you want to double check with your municipality to make sure that that counts. So we put up all of the former webinars that we do in other years on our website. We don't generate certificates for them just because it would be a little bit of a pain for us. And also, there's no way for us to tell if people actually did it or not. We do have interactive online courses, about 6 or 7 of them on our website. Those do produce a certificate at the end, so we get a lot of questions in the last week of the year because people are viewing those. But a lot of times, a lot of municipalities are somewhat flexible with this, so if you do kind of watch a previously recorded one, usually if you can say like, hey, I watched it, it was 2 hours or whatever, usually they're fine giving you credit. Cool. All right, Lindsay's gonna talk about, start us on the meat and bones with the comprehensive plan.
Thanks. I know I unplugged everything accidentally. All right, so how many of you have actually worked on developing a comprehensive plan?
Yeah, is anybody working on one right now?
Sort of? Okay, well, good.
I mean,
one.
there's money, so it's worth looking at if you haven't done
That's
it.
true, yeah. Department of State does award money, smart growth and LWRP funds, which come out in the CFA, right? Yeah, so that comes out every year in the springtime. So you can look for that just as a heads up. All right, so this might be a review for some of you, but also just good to recap everything. And this is a good for if you're new, also to review your local comprehensive plan and get a feel for the goals of your community and just keep those in mind as you're making decisions at the local level. So the purpose of the comprehensive plan is both a policy document that provides legal support and defense for your zoning and land use regulations, but also contains the goals and visions of your community, as well as an inventory of community assets, and expresses what you'd like to preserve and also where you'd like to develop. The implementation of your comprehensive plan is often revising your local zoning and land use regulations. The comprehensive plan gives you direction and meaning to planning activities. It gives a reasoning to your decisions and supports that long and short-term goals for orderly growth. Some things to consider when preparing your comprehensive plan are regional needs and already existing plans that you may want to incorporate, demographic and socioeconomic trends and projections, housing needs and affordable housing in your area. So updating your comprehensive plan. The comprehensive plan is a living document, so you should be regularly monitoring and evaluating and amending that. We are often asked how often you should be updating your plan. There really is no magic number, but you should be revisiting it at least every 5 years and plan to update it at least every 10 years because significant changes can happen at the local level and in those periods of time. And there might be signs within your community that it's time to update, so increases or decreasing population, rise in deteriorating areas. Maybe you have a lot of strip development on the edge of your town and you want to rein that in. New economic growth or development in nearby towns and you want to direct some of that to your community as well. So preparation. The governing board may lead or appoint the planning board or a special board to prepare the comprehensive plan. This board, by resolution, will recommend the proposed plan to the local governing board for adoption. If a special board is utilized, one member of the planning board should serve on that. Community engagement is also a really important part of this process to make the plan relevant and implementation possible. Some potential partners in your community could be business owners, civic leaders, youth organizations, recreation and environmental organizations, elected officials, other planning and zoning members, municipal commissions, your county planning and regional planning boards. And your comp plan should really represent your community and should have the input of your local community. So moratorium. Some communities find it useful to adopt moratorium when they are working on their comprehensive plan because you're making those local decisions and vision of what you want your town and community to look like. So you might want to pause creating more development when you're in the process of making those decisions and making sure what you're agreeing to do aligns with the goals of your community. You don't necessarily have to pause everything if you've already approved a certain project or if it's like building a local home in an area you already have zoned and it's not an issue. So you don't have to pause everything. You can choose certain types of development to pause, but it can be useful to adopt that. And there again is no specific number or amount of time that can be set for moratorium, but what we've seen based off of different court cases which have been challenged for adopting moratoria is that if you adopt it initially for 6 months and then see if you can make it to that long or if you need to extend it, but try not to extend it over the 2-year maximum. Otherwise we've seen a lot of challenges with pausing moratorium, like having paused development for that long.
Does anybody in a board have a moratorium right now? All right. That's good to hear. I think the big one we've been seeing across the state is municipalities really struggling with battery storage. So there's a lot of municipalities that have decided to adopt a moratorium to come up with some regulations around their battery storage technology. So that one's usually one that we see a lot, but yeah, depends on what's going on in your municipality, what you're seeing. So, all right, and yeah, 3 to 6 months. We actually have a publication, so if you're considering it, we really encourage you to encourage your governing board and your town or municipal attorney to read it over while they craft that their legislation for it. All right, so Lindsay kind of gave us an overview. So we always have I always think of the comprehensive plan as kind of like the base, and then we kind of build all of our regulations on top of it. So we're often asked like, well, if we're gonna update our comprehensive plan, like what do we do first? And we always say, do the comp plan first and then build your land use regulations on top of it. So that's when you would go back and change your zoning. To make sure that it's in line, if there's an alignment there. But also it might be an opportunity to update anything else that you do. Subdivision regulations, site plan review, special use permits especially. So, especially because special use permits have to be in accordance with your zoning. So, zoning for our zoning board friends in the audience. So zoning essentially is really any regulation of land use with lot, area, location, and bulk. This is usually done by local law or ordinance. It has to be local law for villages because they don't have ordinance power. And really it should be guiding your land use and site development to support compatible growth and infill development to really help protect your community's resources. Zoning always comes from, kind of was born from preventing fire hazards and other threats to public health and safety. That's where it comes from, is the general police power. So you're adopting these regulations to try to make your community better, try to make, you're trying to make growth work well in your community. So typically we've seen a lot of changes over the past years where everything had its own place. So, only single family residential over here, commercial over here, industrial. We've seen more of a mix towards mixed use zoning where it's a little bit more flexible over time. We've also seen zoning over time become a little bit, I wouldn't say complicated, but more complex. And again, it's probably going to be dependent on what you're finding. If you're having growth, or maybe you're shrinking a little bit, or maybe you're trying to work on community, maybe trying to enhance maybe your downtown area, you might have different regulations for that as well. So zoning is also helpful because it really establishes predictability and consistency for not only residents in your community, but developers that might be considering coming to your community as well. It is not a required land use tool. Only about 78% of municipalities do it. So all of the cities have zoning in New York, but 86% of the villages and 73% of the towns have zoning. So there's still a lot of pockets around New York State where they don't have land use. So in those communities, really the only opportunity to really oversee development in their community is through the use of site plan review. So, does everybody have zoning in the audience? Anybody who doesn't? Nice. All right. This is good. There are a lot of places in New York where a lot of hands go up. So, and really it really provides kind of the baseline guidelines of what development is allowed in your community, and it starts the establishment of the land use development process. So the general framework includes the map, and a lot of times we're asked what's the indicator that we need to update our zoning, and sometimes it's we can't read the map anymore, or we can't find the map is usually the big one that we're like, okay, it's time to update that. Especially because it's like, how is your zoning enforcement officer supposed to do their job if they can't read the map correctly? And then, you set up your districts, and that usually defines what's allowed, so permitted uses, non-permitted uses, lot area, bulk, form standards. And then sometimes there's, if you have a more complex zoning code, you might have, use and site functionality or adverse impact mitigation, especially if you have a sensitive area in your community. Perhaps you have, a waterfront that is subject to flooding a lot. Usually you'll see changes in zoning just to try to be a little bit more cognizant of that threat to your downtown. So pulling some development back from those places and trying to encourage development in places where it makes the most amount of ecological sense. And could be natural resource protection if you're seeing issues of like water quality. We often see like in summer communities where you have a lot of small houses around, seasonal houses around lakes that all have septic systems, and now you're all of a sudden seeing, hey, we're having water quality problems, and algae blooms growing in the water. Usually that often says maybe we need to pull back how much development we're allowing on the shorelines, and really thinking more holistically about how much density we want to encourage in that area. And then, of course, there is the permitting and administrative process that's usually also written out in your law. So, contemporary zoning, like we've seen, it tends to do not just text. I think earlier in the days when zoning was first started, it was all very text heavy. But nowadays we've seen more of illustrations and diagrams to kind of give people an idea of what you're looking for. Especially if you're a community that tends to do the form-based, which is more focused on what the building looks like, not so much what the use is. But there's not a lot of municipalities. If they do form-based, it usually is by, like neighborhood. There's, I think Kingston's the only city that actually adopted a form-based code. So this can be helpful because, again, a lot of times if people are coming before you and they're just residents in the municipality, having, illustrations and tables can be really helpful for them because they don't spend their lives reading zoning laws. And then, of course, this one might be familiar to some of you in the audience. No one size fits all. So rural communities and their zoning is probably going to be a little bit more, is typically simplified, but cities can tend to be a little bit more complicated, but actually Watertown has a pretty good zoning code because there's only about, I think, about 7 different zones, so that's pretty easy to deal with. And then on the left side, we actually have, I think this is the town of Bridgewater, Oneida County, and they had a lot of flooding in their downtown, so when they redid their zoning, it was about trying to pull back. They have an overlay barrier or an overlay zone to really try to pull development back from those places where they were seeing a lot of flooding happening, and really trying to right-size development correctly with some of those storm events. All right, Lindsay's going to talk about subdivision.
Okay, subdivision. So you don't need to have zoning to do subdivision, but all of you seems like you have zoning, so we're not going to get into the details of that. But subdivision is to divide and land to sell or transfer ownership or for development. Your community can further distinguish between major and minor subdivision, and that can be based off the number of lots and land area. It's up to you to make that local law of how you want to regulate that. Subdivision can be reviewed by your planning board, and this slide covers the subdivision elements that your planning board may want to consider. However, these elements need to be adopted into your local law in order for your planning board to take these into consideration. And the things that you're looking at in terms of the goal of subdivision is really, does this subdivision make sense? Do all the elements work together as a whole? And do the lots conform with your other local land use regulations? Is there a compatibility of the layout? Is there service access for emergency vehicles? Are the streets and roads wide enough? Is it walkable for your community? Are there sidewalks? Utility installation? Is there ability to install or attach to municipal sewer? If not, are the lots large enough to have septic? All of those things are what you need to be thinking about when reviewing a subdivision plan. Subdivision does not regulate the style or design of individual buildings or the use. That's all covered in other aspects of zoning, like what Paula already covered. Subdivision review does not negate possible requirements for the health department, like what I mentioned with the sewer, so that will also have to be considered. Another type of subdivision is called cluster or conservation subdivision. So your traditional zoning may say 1 house per acre, but with cluster development, like you see in this image, all the houses are pushed into one area together, and then you're able to conserve that open space to have, the nice stream corridor and prevent stormwater runoff from going into that stream, so it benefits your environment. It also could maintain ag land if that is what that land is being used for. It can really help maintain the existing uses and develop less of the land. The part you do have to consider when choosing to do cluster development is that you can't have more lots made and created than would be fit normally by your traditional zoning amount. And you have to also give this authority to your planning board to be able to review cluster development as well.
Unless you decide to add to it. So in a lot of communities that are struggling with affordable housing, they use cluster conservation subdivision, and then they incentivize. So they actually put a density bonus for setting aside a certain amount for affordable housing. So we say traditionally how it's written in statute, it's density neutral, but there is an opportunity if you find that you have a lack of housing, trying to encourage it, you can incentivize it through, as long as your governing board adopts it, so, yeah.
Just to paraphrase, to make sure I understand. So let's say your lot size is, pick a square footage. If you're saying that that entire area is X acres, as long as the aggregate divided by the number meets that, you're good to go.
Exactly. Yep, you got it.
And the idea is like you're conserving, and it's sometimes a win-win for the developer as well, because, you know, if you cluster it to one side of this parcel, you're probably laying like less road in and out. It also can really help with like social cohesion, so you're a little bit closer to your neighbors if that's what you're encouraging in your community. And then, yeah, use the open space open for whatever you've seen. And then usually that's handled by like easement.
Any other questions on cluster? Okay. All right, so subdivision review procedures. This could be a possible checklist for how you review your subdivision applications. Is the seeker component complete? Was the application referred to the county under 239N if subdivision is, I don't know if you have that in, you do have 239N, so yes, send it to your, oh, I thought I clicked it, sorry. I thought I hit it. Are there any conditions put on that approval? And any requirements for recreation land or parkland? If it is approved or denied by the majority vote within 62 days of that hearing, and if not, there is a default approval for subdivision.
Yeah, so that's really important to know as planning board members is subdivision statute is the most prescriptive of all the land use regulations. It's the longest bit of town law, village law, general city law. It also specifically grabs the seeker process and discusses how it fits into the process itself. So seeker doesn't, or the timeline for 62 days doesn't really happen until you have a complete application, which includes handling seeker. So these are usually not decisions that subdivisions usually tend to take a little bit of time to work out, unless you're dealing with something that's pretty basic, like a 1 or 2 lot subdivision. But this is really the building blocks of development that happens in your community, and this is specifically the only one that has a default approval provision. So if you don't make that decision within 62 days after the close of the public hearing, they do get a default approval. So that means they can just take their plat, go down to your county clerk's office and file it. So you want to make sure that you're, as planning board members, that you're always cognizant of how much time is going on, and really feel like you have all the information you need to be able to discuss it as a complete application. If the applicant keeps not coming back to you with stuff that you're asking for to come up with that complete application, keep holding until you have everything and you get through the full seeker process, and then so that you're ready and able to do the work, and then have your public hearing, and then move towards adoption or disapproval too. Yes?
In your training, the planning board overview training you guys have on YouTube,
Yep.
I thought what started the clock was a decision, was it a decision on the seeker?
So it's usually closing the seeker process is
Okay.
then when you consider it a complete application, and then the ticking starts.
Okay, all right, I just saw the public hearing here, and I was like, hang on a second, what started the clock, the public hearing? What is it?
Yeah, so with seeker, it often ends up the public hearing kind of gets cooked in together, and that's why you have it. So it's dependent on how seeker goes. So if you end up with a neg deck, it's a little different than if you go through the whole environmental impact statement, which kind of then you have to have a public hearing and kind of gets dropped out a little.
230, and I thought it was gonna be M, so I said yes.
Oh.
So, and we don't have the subdivision for
Okay.
Jefferson County.
That's okay.
But if people want before,
Well, that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
sorry.
No, I appreciate you
So
speaking
only
up, because
about-
that, yeah. you know.
Only about half the counties do
Okay.
subdivision review as on the county basis too, so.
Right.
So it's good to know that. Yes.
You may have said this already, but where did the 62 come from? Like, why
Okay, so we
62?
call it 62 days, we call it like the magic number in New York, and that's because we have 62 counties, 62 cities, and 62 days is 2 31-day months. And so I think it's a complete, 2 complete full months is how I don't know, the state legislature somehow came up with that. But I find 62 counties, 62 cities, 62 days, we all make our decisions.
Anything else? No? All right, so boundary, I didn't put this last time. All right, boundary and lot line adjustment. So alteration of lot lines or dimensions of any lots or sites where no additional lot is created. This is often an expedited process and doesn't need the same full review as subdivision. This can be done to correct physical encroachment, settle a land dispute, and enlarge or improve substandard lots so that they can be made buildable.
So up to you to decide whether you're gonna do it as subdivision or not. Some do it as a minor subdivision. Some cities actually do it in their planning offices and don't have their planning board. It's more of an administrative review. But again, up to you on how you handle, how your governing board decides to legislate on these. But it's usually for me buying 5 feet of setback from Lindsay to like build my perfect she shed. Because I built it without getting an area variance ahead of time, so I have to fix it. So that's usually where we see a lot of like lot line adjustments is.
And we're gonna cover area variances in a little bit, so, and we'll talk about the garage that encroaches. All right. So that one's pretty straightforward. Site plan review, you're also probably familiar with this, so that's looking at the design of the proposed development of a single parcel. Typically, we don't see review for single family, it's usually looking at commercial and industrial uses, but it's really looking at the layout of the site and whether it will flow well with traffic, the curb cut, all of that. It's really to decide and determine if it's going to work with the context of where the development is going to be placed. So the elements the planning board may consider in site plan review are delegated by the local governing board. The planning board does not have the authority to review the elements that are not included in the site plan review law, which can be standalone or part of your local zoning. So this slide highlights some of the elements you can consider, so the compatibility with adjacent uses, those proper setbacks, screening and landscaping, utilities, consider those underground options, sewage, storm drainage, parking, access, traffic, lighting, signage, proposed grades and contours, all of those things you want to consider when reviewing an individual parcel. So we talked about this a little bit too, special use permits. So special use permits help with some of those more challenging uses that may not fit in regularly to your local residential or commercial area. So this image shows a gas station that's actually in Lake Placid, New York. And the special use permit, kind of make the gas station look like it fit in with that Adirondack motif. But really what the special use permit does is give you the ability to put conditions on allowing that use. So in this case, it's to make it look like it fits in with the rest of the aesthetic of the community when it's something that may not normally fit in. But it's really up to you, and it can be put in by use or by district. So say you have a historic area that you want to preserve, you can make sure you can put in conditions to maintain that aesthetic in that district if that's what's a priority to you in your community.
So I think in a lot of communities, you typically do site plan and subdivision review kind of hand in hand. Because a lot of times you might have, you might subject them to both. Another thing to keep in mind for that example was, it's not just the Adirondack motif, but something like a gas station or a service station, even though, let's face it, most are becoming like places we pick up beer and food and all this other crazy stuff. But this is a service station, so you might condition how many cars can be located on the parcel itself as well, so you don't end up with like 30 cars parked all over the place. But again, subject to the conditions that you have written into your regulations, and that's the same for site plan review. So I always tell people, especially if you're dealing with like national change that comes to you, you can always ask for more, but you can only rely on the elements of review that are based in your local regulations. So always ask for more, but if you have it written in, you can kind of like really kind of stick their feet to the fire. But also to keep in mind with them is they usually come with lots of architectural different choices, so they're going to give you the cheapest option first that might work. And you know, if you're a community that has, you know, community design tools and are really trying to like beautify your, you know, downtown, you know, little Main Street or whatnot, and somebody is coming to you, like ask for more, keep going back and forth, like push. A lot of times they're probably coming to you for a reason because it's going to make business sense for them. So making sure that you try to get the best out of it is always good for your community as well. So I'll leave it at that. So do we have any questions before we move into zoning board of appeals?
Regarding the elements for review,
Yeah.
so is there like a baseline of elements that we can review, or is it specifically, if it is not spelled out, we cannot review?
Yeah, so you're actually tied to how your site plan and your special use permit conditions are criteria are listed in your law. You can always ask for more, but then you can't require them to. So if they say for some reason if you didn't have parking, which would be weird, but we'll just go with it. You would say like, well, we really want parking, and they could say, well, it's not listed in your law, so we don't want to give it to you. So that's why usually site plan review tends to be pretty substantial in terms of like how you write your local zoning or your local regulations, because you want to make sure that you have things like you know, traffic circulation, especially if you're dealing with things like you know, like drive-throughs. So you're going to want to make sure that you're looking at that so it makes sense, or if you're looking at signage for it as well, that the signage on the site actually makes sense and is actually telling people where you're supposed to go. There's plenty of, there are a lot of examples out there of just a lot of signage, but it doesn't really tell you anything. So sometimes like communities have to kind of tell them, like a good example was one of our colleagues has a Dunkin' in her, and they wanted like 12 different signs, and they were like, this is not gonna work for us because these signs aren't really telling anybody. It's just, it also included a pink stripe around the parking lot too, which were like, in one winter, it's like, that's gonna be gone too. So it was more of a negotiation of what's actually gonna make sense for them, and they went kind of back and forth and ended up with the right amount of signage, so.
But with regards to, so for example, on contours and grades.
Yeah.
Even if it's not in our code stipulating what it is, we can still look at it, talk about it, but we can't force them to meet anything.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So also, if you're ever looking to update your regulations and want to take a look at what maybe some other municipalities are doing in terms of what regulations or what elements that they're looking at, feel free to reach out to us. We'd be happy to walk you through it. One of our staff used to write a lot of zoning for a lot of communities across New York State. She's really great when you have those, when you're thinking about updating it, so. All right, so zoning board of appeals. So we're back to our zoning friends here. So it all starts really with your zoning enforcement officer. So they make the first determination of, so they read the law kind of like a robot. So they read it just plain text how it is. So then they make, the applicant comes to them for their first, I want to do X, Y, Z with my property. So, a lot of times, you know, if they don't get what they want, they're going to appeal it to the board for an interpretation. So this is where the appellant believes that the zoning enforcement officer wrongly applied the law. And so what starts this whole process is that determination from the zoning enforcement official. And most of the time, interpretations really are kind of tie back to maybe bits of your zoning being a little vague. So a lot of times it's definitions. So is it a deck? Is it a dock? Is it a drive-through, or is it a food truck that you're walking up to? We've seen a little bit of it all out there. Or it's a method of taking measurements, or maybe the method of taking measurements is not consistent throughout your entire zoning law. So is it from the base center of the road to the property line, or is it from the property line to the front door? So again, it's important to be kind of clear in your regulations. If it's a definition thing and it's just not defined in your zoning law at all, the board can come together and use the ordinary meaning of the term. So that's just opening up the dictionary and deciding, does this work or not? In the city of Albany, we had one about the definition of what an auditorium is, because we had a rave that was, we had an armory that was holding raves, and the neighborhood did not really like that. So they said, no, you need to have it for in an auditorium. And they said, well, an auditorium works, this is what we're doing, it's like a dance party on the floor. But the zoning board used a very narrow definition of an auditorium as having fixed seating. And they said, since this doesn't have fixed seating, it's not an auditorium. They ended up suing through that process, and it actually went against the city for that one. So again, important when you're opening up the definitions or the dictionary, read the whole dictionary or the whole definition. Don't like cherry pick, because sometimes that comes, if they sue you, it sometimes comes back. Or you sometimes look back at past decisions on similar or same regulations. So you say, you know what, we've always had a hard time deciding what a short-term rental is. So on this one, we're gonna say it's this, and then from here out, that's the definition we're gonna use. So definitions are super important because this is often what arises with the most amount of interpretations. But if you don't have them, the board has to come to a consensus on what they think the term or the regulation needs. So again, sometimes that's also the key, like, hey, we need to update our zoning because we're getting way too many applications for interpretations or way too many use variance applications. That usually is a sign that, hey, something's out of line. We need to go back and make some changes to make it flow a little bit better. So, yes.
In the first bullet there, couldn't you also have a comma, planning board? Because.
Yeah. Okay. So the planning board can also, yes, go to the zoning board of appeals and say, we're at a disagreement of what this actually means. So sometimes that happens as well.
Well, that's the only time I've ever had to use the ZBA because the planning board tried to enforce something that wasn't right or is right, and they still want to do it, so you have to go to the zoning board.
Yeah,
of appeals.
Yep. So that would make sense too. All right. And then the second one is variances, which is, I think, a lot of what the zoning board of appeals ends up doing. So that is the appeal for a use or area variance. The area or the use variance is to use land for a purpose that's not allowed in your zoning regulations. And area variance is really providing relief from the dimensional requirements of your zoning. The important thing to keep in mind about variances is once they are applied, they run with the lands, not with the landowner. So once you place a use variance on something, it sits forever. And really with zoning or with use variances, we always say, if you shouldn't be really encouraging it because it really chips away at the original intent of not only your comprehensive plan, but also your zoning regulations. So again, use variance use land that's not allowed in the zoning regulations, and it's a very strict statutory test. And the applicant has to prove to you that they can overcome all 4 prongs. If they fail one of these prongs, they should be denied the use variance. So, whereas area variance, you can fail the whole 5 prongs and still end up with your area variance. It's very prescriptive in use variance that they fail one, they automatically should be denied. So, and the proper way to fix that is to, instead of placing a use variance, is to encourage your zoning or your governing board to rezone the parcel. So, but that requires a legislative change. So a lot of times boards feel pressure to just grant a use variance, but in about like 98% of the time, like really shouldn't do it. And I'll say this one anecdote. So we used to poll the audience and say, like, have you ever given a use variance? But I think that's a little too, like, it's a little too much, right? But we were asking at one point, and somebody said, he was like, I've been on my planning, or on my zoning board for like 40 years. And he was like, we gave 1 use variance in that whole time. And our colleague asked, well, what was different about that one time? And he said, I was sick that night and missed the meeting. So it's one of those things that you really shouldn't be putting out there. So, but we'll go through the statutory test because it's important for you to understand. So I'm not going to read them all because we'll have one for each one. So we start with a reasonable rate of return. So this is where the zoning board really has to ask a lot of questions and, you know, require documentation from applicants. They're proving to you that they need this. It's not you proving to them that they need this. So there's no hard and fast numbers. A lot of times people are like, well, what exactly is a reasonable rate of return? And you as the zoning board come together as 3 or 5 members. You decide if somebody can pass this. So a lot of times they're going to come with, their realtor is going to tell you, well, we haven't been able to sell this property for, 6 months or a year, and we've dropped the price, and, it's, a bad business, or they're not going to tell you it's a bad business decision, but it might have been a bad business decision. And it basically, there's plenty of case law out there that says that developers are entitled to a reasonable, but not necessarily the most profitable return. So in this Petrozzulli case, I think this comes back from the late 80s, early 90s. Petrozzulli applied for a use variance for a 2-family home in a lot that was zoned for a 1-family home. And their argument was, well, it's more profitable to have 2 units instead of having 1, so you should give it to us because it's an unnecessary hardship if you don't give this to us, and the courts didn't buy it. So again, it's gonna be dependent on whatever the situation is coming before you, but they should be able to come with financial, like, dollars and cents. We've tried it 8 different ways. It has another use variance. It doesn't work for the old use variance that's on it either. But again, definitely, like, variances aren't here to remedy, like, your bad business decisions, like Petrozzulli tried in Westchester. And then the property is one or only of a few that are affected to the point where zoning would create a hardship. So a lot of times we get this in rural communities that used to have, a schoolhouse. So the school isn't used anymore, it's been kind of vacant, you're not quite sure what you're gonna do with it, so they're saying, this is a unique parcel because nobody's gonna live a single-family house in the middle of, in a school building. Again, the right way to handle that is to actually just rezone it, and then people say, well, Paula, that's gonna be spot zoning if we only rezone that one parcel. But if you can tie it back to your comprehensive plan that says, no, actually we really need multifamily housing, we need housing in our community. This is a developer that's considering putting in maybe memory care facility or assisted living for our community. Most likely there's a hole of that unique need in your community. So if you were to rezone it to allow it and you were challenged on spot zoning, the courts would turn back to your comprehensive plan and say, no, this is a reasonable use of rezoning one parcel. So don't be afraid of that, but a lot of times communities really struggle with these because these terms, if they're not used anymore, it's hard to adaptively and creatively reuse those properties. So, of course, for this, it's the uniqueness of the land that causes plight. It's not the uniqueness of the plight of the owner, even though most likely they're going to say that anyway. So this is based on physical features or architectural features or adjacent uses. I'm often asked, what is a good example of this? And I would say, it's kind of hard to come up with these, but let's say you have a municipal airport and there's a lot of development happening around it. You have a single family residential building there, and you're expanding your landing zone, and so they're going to hear planes coming in and out all day. I would say, yeah, maybe that's probably a unique circumstance that might pass, but again, I would probably just encourage your zoning or your governing board to rezone and allow maybe commercial in that place instead of residential. Then there is the self-created hardship. So a lot of times this is where we drive around New York State and we see as we come into towns. Welcome to the town of Boonville, zoning and ordinance in effect. And so that tells you right there. So the regulations exist at the time of sale, whether they know it or not. So friends don't let friends buy real estate without looking at the zoning. So it's important to know that. The only way around this one is a lot of times a owner right now wants to sell their property, the buyer will say get a use variance as part of it. They won't fail self-created hardship if they didn't buy it yet. What they're saying is as their ability to sell it is being able to get a use variance. So that would be the only way you would flunk self-created hardship, but once the property passes, you are held to your regulations whether you like it or not. Another one is hey, I spent a ton of money on this. I started my, third story on my house not knowing any better. There's plenty of case law out there that have required people to take down their third level or fill in their in-ground pool because they built it in the wrong place, even though that's an area variance. But plenty of stuff out there. So just saying well, I didn't know that this existed, doesn't fly. So again, ask questions while you sit on your board. And then finally, the most, which kind of requires you to go out there and do site visits, which we encourage planning and zoning board members to do, is neighborhood character. So if you don't die on the first three, you might die here. And this is it consistent with existing development, and would there be an adverse impact in the neighborhood or community? So this is a picture. I would say most likely the person living in the Victorian house on the left-hand side would probably say that this is maybe detrimental to the community character because of the fact that it's development that's really out of touch with what's going on around it, plus with the parking out front. Looking at this all day, I would say, yeah, this is probably difficult for community character. So, again, this is why we say get out there, ask questions. Don't take them at the word. You can always, require more and more. I've had stories from builders that sit on things where somebody has argued with them. Well, I need this product, and this product is so expensive, I can't do this. And he was like, buddy, I know that it's not that expensive because I'm in this business too. So sometimes this is where, being everyday, a lot of times everyday people on these boards, you have a lot of your own experience that will help when it comes to questioning people. Yes?
We recently had one that potential negates all four of those.
Mm-hmm.
We had people applying for a solar field
Mm-hmm.
in an area that where they not allowed at all.
Yeah.
And their basis was a court decision with a public utility test.
Yeah. Okay, so that is different. So And that is a case out of Athens down in Greene County. And that was a board that kept saying no, and we don't allow it here. The problem with the public utility use variance is it is a lot easier of a test for energy providers to overcome. So originally it kind of came from Indian Point in Westchester County with the town of Greenberg. And the idea was that energy generation is bigger than your own municipality and that there's a community need elsewhere. So the courts granted a lot more lenience to Entergy about building, I think it was cooling towers in the 70s.
One test was a wind farm.
Yeah, so I think it's fair to say for energy projects right now, it's difficult because they can say, well, there's a need for this power somewhere in New York State. And so we can place, these facilities in places that you don't want it, just because there's a greater need for it. So that is evolving case law that we keep an eye on, but yes, we are kind of nervous for the municipalities because it does open up the door to a lot of renewable projects in places, even if you have the best regulations and you're trying to find that balance. Maybe you're not a community that says, hey, we don't want it at all, but it would make more sense for it to be here or there in this part of town versus another part of town, and then you have somebody come in and say, well, we want it in this part of town and we're gonna go for the public utility variance. It's pretty difficult. So what I've been saying to communities now is really taking a look at the three-phase power connections in your community and really thinking about kind of comprehensively about maybe building some regulations about renewable into those areas, because if you don't have three-phase power, most likely you're not gonna have solar developers knocking on your door.
That's what happened. They told it because they found out the grid couldn't take it. So.
Yeah. And I think it's just right now we're seeing a lot of changes on the federal side too. So we're in like a kind of a weird time with renewable energy. So there's a lot of stuff in the pipeline. I'll be interested to see if a lot of it gets built in reality or maybe not as much. Yes.
Also with the utility side, looking at areas where you have sub-transmission or transmission lines going across your property, there's a lot of large generation solar coming into the area.
Yeah. Unfortunately, if you're closer to those, you're definitely going to be more ripe for this kind of development because it's easier for them to kind of hook into the grid. This is also why we encourage municipalities to have that conversation with your energy. I'm not sure if you guys are National Grid up this way or not, but having that discussion with them as well, so that when you are reviewing them, that the projects actually can end up hooking into the grid after all, because I think even sometimes from their perspective, they're like, well, you can approve it, but we're not going to actually hook it up. So you want to make sure that they are willing to hook it up if you're going to go through the process. Yes?
Can we go back to self-created hardship for just a minute?
Yeah.
If I bought the property and let's say it was a three-family house that I bought.
Okay.
And at the time it was zoned for three-family, but I wasn't using the third apartment.
Okay.
Zoning changes and I decided, hey, I want to use that third, but it's now zoned for only two-family. Is that a self-created hardship, or is that because the zoning changed and I wasn't using it for that, maybe I was using it for an office for a while myself.
Yeah, so you might, so in that example, you might actually have what we call a non-conforming status. So you owned it at the time, it stays in place. So whatever exists in that area kind of exists is what we used to call grandfathering, but we call it pre-existing non-conforming
Right,
uses.
but I wasn't using it as that third family thing, and now I want.
But now you want to? I would say it would probably depend on if it's considered a non-conforming use, but I could see that as being a non-conforming
Is
use,
that a
whether they use
self-created
it or not.
hardship? Is that what that's considered?
I would say it's actually not a self-created hardship because of the fact that you couldn't help the fact that the zoning laws changed after you owned it. So I would say you could maybe pass the test on that.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. All right. So, so a lot of times we get a lot of questions about the differences between the use variance and special use permits. And I mean, the really big one is special use permits are already allowed by zoning, and then you're subjecting it to your local standards. So you just want it to make it fit into your neighborhood a little bit better. It's for things like home occupancy or home occupations, or maybe you do short-term rentals by special use permit. So, you know, you're gonna condition like how many, you know, cars you might have coming in and out of, you know, the parking lot or whatever at any given time. Whereas, you know, the use variance is specifically for a use that's just not allowed by zoning. And you're held to the statutory tests that we just went over. So, so again, the North Shore Steak versus the Village of Thomason was actually one about, it was a special use permit that was, and said it was because they were controlling the hours of operation in which they could have a drive-through, and they said specifically in their special use permit that they couldn't use the drive-through for the hours of like 11 to 2 and 4 to 6, which is when people are going to a drive-through most of the time. And really what we got out of that is, you know, the court said a variance is an authority to a property owner to use property in a manner forbidden by the ordinance, while special use permit allows the property owner to put his property to use expressly permitted by the ordinance. The inclusion of the permitted use in the ordinance is tantamount to a legislative finding that the permitted use is in harmony with the general zoning plan and will not adversely affect the neighborhood. So again, it's really holding you to those local standards to make it fit in better, but it's already a use that's allowed, a special use permit. All right, so Lindsay's gonna go over area variances, which is a lot more fun because you can flunk the whole thing and still end up with the use, with the area variance.
Don't give it all away.
Sorry.
All right, so area variances provide relief from the dimensional requirements of zoning. So in this picture here, you see that there's a driveway and it's very close to that property line. So they were likely given an area variance to be able to install that driveway. And perhaps one of the conditions of that area variance was the installation of that solid fence because they're so close to the neighboring property. So these are the types of conditions you could impose on someone coming in for an area variance that both appeases the applicant but also benefits the community. So you may receive area variances for setback requirements, height restrictions, lot coverage maximums, and the frontage requirements potentially for a flag lot in your community. So, as Paula mentioned, there is an area variance test. There are 5 parts to the area variance test. It is not as stringent as the use variance test. You do not have to pass it. All these conditions must be considered by the ZBA, and the ZBA's findings on each should be in the decision and part of the record. For example, though there might be alternatives that wouldn't require an area variance, the ZBA might determine that granting the area variance could be in the best interest of not only the applicant, but also the community. So that fence could be an example of that. So does the area variance cause undesirable change to your neighborhood? Will the conditions of the approval make it fit better into the neighborhood? Some examples, not particularly burdensome, could be screening, lighting, or access. In the first photo here, we see that tall apartment building that kind of doesn't fit in with the rest of the buildings in that neighborhood. This is also in the city of Albany. But what we don't have is a large parking lot or other issues that are making it also not conform with that area. In the middle is actually a corner lot with a parking lot, but you can see they had them put in screening to block that view out. Again, that's the compromise. And that mobile sign is from that same gas station in Lake Placid. So it consists of that same motif, and then also, it's not an internally lit sign, it has that external light hanging over, so it's a little more subtle, not as much impact on the surrounding area as those like bright LED lights that you now see around all the time that can be hated, in my opinion.
Yeah, if you're the community that doesn't want LED signs, like, you're more than welcome to outlaw LED signs or backlit signs in your community. It's up to you to decide. But yeah, I actually laughed because I was on Long Island last week or the week before. We were doing site plan review, and our picture was like one of those old, it was like an old Wendy's drive-through. We were talking about, like, how traffic circulates and what it looks like when you pull up for the drive-through, and it was like one where somebody went out with like the little like letters and actually like changed it all the time, and I was like, oh, this is so old, because nowadays when you pull up to these things, it's like the brightest LED sign known to man that you can see from space. And sometimes now, like, AI talks to you instead of a real person. It's so weird. Like, just even how drive-throughs are now are like totally different thanks to AI too. So again, like, if you have like a Taco Bell next to a residential neighborhood and they're gonna have one of those LED screens for ordering, like, yeah, it might scream like tons of light into that neighboring property that you might want to consider what that actually is like when you're doing site plan review.
And that's also a good point of technology changes how you might want to use your zoning. So that's another way to identify you. Time for an update. So alternatives to not requiring a variance. Alternatives that would not require an area variance could be done earlier with the zoning enforcement officer or with the planning board in certain circumstances. This could be, a driveway, a garage. These may not be possible due to existing factors. The board's job is to ask questions and see if there's a solution that the applicant has not thought of. Often a site visit helps understand the circumstances and possible alternatives. Consider alternatives for the function, also the design, cost, and aesthetics. Also possibility of maybe relocating the project on the site, and maybe the area variance wouldn't be needed. And this image here, the idea is that this homeowner wanted to add an addition on the side of their house to have, I think, was it a garage or a kitchen? But their property line was, they would be impeding on the next door neighbor's property line. So would it be possible to have that in the back side, because it is a corner lot, so you could add the driveway to go around the back side of the house rather than on the front side. So these are things you can consider in terms of granting the variances. So
this is like the best part of being on the zoning board, because like, it's like being a detective. Like, you have to go back and forth. Well, why do you want to do it here? Wouldn't it make more sense over here? And I say this because my parents had to do this with their garage, but in Maine, which is not the same as New York, of course, but they did have to kind of go back and forth with their board about, like, well, why do you want to build your garage in this place? Can't you do it over here? And for them, it was the tree lines made sense for it in one space versus another, and they ended up getting their variance. So again, good to ask questions. Like, don't take people at their word. You're welcome to ask more questions and kind of get an idea of what they're really thinking.
And also consider the substantiality of the request. So the goal is to approve the minimum variance as possible. Basically, everybody walks away a little bit unhappy and a little bit happy. So, you gotta find that happy middle ground there. There's really no official method to this. Obviously, substantial is really a subjective term. So we'd like to try to give you examples in terms of ways you can with measuring it in feet. So if you were to take, a 5-foot variance versus 50, obviously, in the scale of how big that lot is or how big that frontage is, that's what makes the difference. What is that percentage? 2 feet out of 30 feet versus 5 feet out of 10, so 7% versus 50%. They might sound like small numbers, but it's the scale of the matter that is the impact.
Yeah, so my lot in the city of Albany is 48 feet. So 5 feet of a 10-foot setback would actually be extremely substantial. Our houses are pretty close together. So a lot of times this is dependent on whether you are more rural, suburban, or urban, because substantiality is gonna be different depending on what community you're kind of working in. So 10 feet, you know, in a suburban place where everybody has, you know, a couple of acres, like probably not that big of a deal. But in some of those more closer places, it could be pretty substantial, pretty fast.
All right, so physical or environmental impacts. We've talked about this a bit with the site plan review as well. So it's really all those considerations of stormwater and what will end in your community. So if it is stormwater, as we're trying to depict here in these images, you may require them to have a bioretention pond or some kind of stormwater garden so that that water is flowing and being collected and preventing it from running off into the road and causing additional pollution to your waterways and to your community. Flooding perhaps could be an issue too from that, going into people's basements. You have unhappy people that come to you and complain. There's a way to prevent that from happening. So other ways you want to consider. And then again, is the situation self-created? So in this instance here, if it was this person built that garage, or really looks more like a shed in that picture, but if that was built before getting the variance or permit to build, and then they were too close to that property line, that's a self-created hardship. It does not necessarily mean like in the use variance that they fail. It's just, again, a consideration that you need to take into account when reviewing this. And they can still get the variance if that's the case, but you know, there might be other issues if they built something without a permit, so you can take that into consideration as well.
I always tell people, friends don't let friends dig in-ground pools without permits, because there's so much case law in New York State from people who dig their $70,000 in-ground pool on their neighbor's property. So always important to also, like, if things are really tight in places, like asking for a survey is sometimes helpful too. So, but yeah. But, you know, sometimes this is one of those ones that you can say, well, I didn't know, and, you know, I'm asking for forgiveness after I did something. You know, this might be something that, like, you're like, okay, we're willing to work with you on this, but there's also plenty of case law out there where they've said, like, this is unacceptable, and, like, you're gonna have to take down your shed, or you're gonna have to fill in your in-ground pool. So again, knowing your regulations is super important, so let your friends know to do that as well. All right, so we just did a lot of zoning board of appeals. Do we have any questions before we move on to more of the procedural stuff that kind of is for everybody? We done? All right. All right, so the back end is really just talking about all the stuff that not just you as planning or zoning board members, but this is often sometimes important for your governing board members to know as well. So we start with a quorum and open meetings law. So to conduct business as a board, you need to have a quorum, which is the number of members present to conduct legal business, which is half. So at least a majority of a fully constituted board, which includes your absent members and vacant seats. So if you have a board of 5 and you have 1 vacancy, you still need 3 to conduct business. So difficult when you have vacancies because you're relying on more people to actually show up, and so there's less of an opportunity for people to call out sick or not be around for it. So also that's helpful when you use things like alternates, which you can use at any time. It's up to your governing board to decide. Alternates by statute can be used for conflicts of interest only, but you can supersede statute and use them for things like illnesses or or absences and vacations or something like that. So if you can find people to sit on as absentee or to have those members, alternate members, is really helpful if you're finding that it's difficult to conduct business to make sure everybody's there. So quorum's important, so majority. So most of the boards that we see are 5, so that means you need to have at least 3 of you. Open meetings law means that public bodies have to discuss applications and do their board business in front of the public, which means that they have access and notice. So this allows the public to listen and observe. It doesn't mean that they get to participate, they just get to watch their government at work. So this includes agenda setting meetings if you're, and site visits if you're doing it as a group together. What we say for site visits is don't go as a quorum, though you can, because there is case law that allows for an overkeeper case that you can join as long as you don't discuss the merits of the case together. You can go to a site visit as a quorum, but we typically just discourage it in general. So if you go out and do a site visit, do it as like you and another person, you know, and you take a clipboard, don't talk about it, just kind of take down your notes and questions that you might use in your meeting. Do the work of the meeting in the public meeting. And then this also requires scheduling or posting the meeting schedule, giving it to the media, posting notices and schedules on the municipal website. The big thing here is use your municipal website. Hopefully it's updated pretty regularly, but we've seen a lot of changes since COVID about really providing more information on municipal websites for members of the public to understand what's going on in their community. So notice and access is providing notice to the media. A lot of times it's the first in the year in January. You're gonna post, your secretary is gonna send out something saying, hey, we meet every third Wednesday of the month at 7 p.m. at Town Hall. So that covers that. You usually put it maybe in your library or in Town Hall. You might have a bulletin board where you put that too. Put it on the website as well. Notice if, so public notice for the meetings, if it's more than 1 week out, you need to provide at least 72 hours or 3 days in advance. If it's less than a week, it's to notice to the extent practicable. So if all of a sudden there's an issue in your community and let's say a building's starting to fall into the sidewalk and it's like an actual like health and safety issue and your town board needs to like discuss it, sometimes it's just putting like we're having a town hall or we're having a town board meeting at 3 p.m. today and you stick it on the front door of town hall and like that's what you do. So there's not a whole lot of open meeting police out there, so do the best you can about being open with your citizens. And then make any materials that are to be discussed at least 24 hours prior to the meeting on your municipal website if it's updated regularly. So there are some loopholes here, but the idea is really trying to encourage people to be able to find work, what the boards are up to. So this is especially important if you're a municipality that sends out, if you're having a public hearing, and you have a local requirement for, you know, people within 100 feet of the property line gets a notice of a public hearing. Like, you want to make sure that if they're coming to the meeting that they have an idea of what exactly is actually proposed for that area. So you want to make sure that if it's like perhaps a site plan review, at least some of the project files that are up there, so they have an idea of if they're talking during the public hearing, like what they come prepared with good comments to give you as part of the board proceedings, and not just, I haven't heard about this before, and why am I only just hearing about this now? So trying to put stuff up there, it's difficult. I know the city of Albany actually got hacked through their development profiles one year. So it's difficult and it's a lot of work for the administrative person trying to put it out, but also if you have things like financial information, like redact that before posting it online, of course. And sometimes we've even seen some of the counties have had scams happen from county referral happening. So like you can redact names too, so that you have less of that kind of scammy things. Weird scams have been happening in 2025 is what I guess I'll say on that. So, you know, try to do your best there. And then it's always good to have board procedures. A lot of boards don't, but If you want to see samples of it, feel free to reach out to us, but they have to be adopted by your governing board, by local law or ordinance. And usually it's just good to have an idea of how the land use review process goes. So it's often, who are the officers and what do they do? Who gets to call the meeting? Who's pulling together the agenda for the meeting? And how are we going to decide what goes first? Sometimes you do old business first and then new business. Or you might do most controversial issue that you have a public hearing on first because the media is going to show up, so you want to get that kind of over with first before you move on. Or vice versa, I've heard it the other way too. Put the controversial thing at the end, because if somebody's coming in for like a quick area variance, that's not going to take a whole lot of time. Sometimes you want to let them come in and out, and then you'll have all the rest of the meeting to worry about what's controversial in your community. So up to you on how you figure that out. If things have to be referred to the county, who handles that referral and actually getting it over to the county? Your minutes, who's drafting your minutes, who's posting them? So minutes should always be done within 2 weeks of the meeting and posted, and preferably online. They can be draft and you can stamp them as drafts if you're a community that actually adopts your minutes, but you should be trying to put that up there so that it helps when people call us too, because we can actually look and see what's been talked about in your meetings. And then official document signatures. So a lot of times that falls on your chair. It's like they're, especially on the planning board, they might be signing subdivision plats before they go ahead to the county clerk's office. So good to know how it kind of works, especially when you're new, kind of sitting with the chair and getting an idea of who does what through the process. Hopefully you have those regulations. If you don't, you can always, there's always time to put some regulations in place, and feel free to reach out to us. All right, Lindsay's gonna talk about seeker.
Seeker. All right, so seeker is a component of the larger review and decision, but it's not the primary act. Really, the idea behind seeker is considering and gathering information about the environment at the earliest part. So right at the beginning is really what we encourage you to do. And you're taking into consideration not only your traditional environment, but also the community character and local impacts on your community that may come from the development project proposed. So seeker has 3 different classifications for actions. Type 1 actions are presumed to have an environmental impact, and they do require that long environmental assessment form. Type 2 actions are actions that are not presumed to have any impact, so they actually do not have to do the full seeker process. When you determine an action as a type 2 action, seeker can conclude. And then there are unlisted actions, which the majority of actions are. And that is where you still need to follow the seeker process, but most likely you'll end up using that short environmental assessment form, and you're going to still determine whether or not it has a significant environmental impact. So we'll just do a really quick overview of the seeker process. So you're going to first classify the action into one of those 3 actions we just talked about. Then you'll need to establish the lead agency who is going to take the lead on this process. Determine the significance of the action, and then if it's negative, seeker concludes. So every time there's a red star indicated on the bullet, that's an option for where seeker can be ended. So if the action is classified as that type 2 action, you can conclude seeker. If the significance is negative, then you can end seeker there. But all of the point in this too is that you make sure you record that in your record so that no one challenges you on that in the future. When a positive declaration is made, an environmental impact statement is needed. This doesn't mean that the project won't happen, it just means that more information needs to be gathered, and that's what the environmental impact statement does. Based on the environmental impact statement findings, each involved agency must prepare its own written seeker finding statement after a final EIS has been filed and before the agency makes a final decision, and then seeker concludes. And you can start your normal review of all the procedures that we've discussed. So the public hearing, the purpose of the public hearing is to hear from members of your community and the public on feedback on a proposed project. As Paula said, it can be a very simple area variance, or it may be a more contentious project where people have a lot of opinions. It's for your board to hear the public opinion on all land use proposals, and you can't require that anyone state their name or if they live in your community when they come up to their microphone.
Did you say you can't?
You can't require that. You can't make them say their name.
So you can ask people to identify themselves, and most likely if they live next door, they're probably gonna tell you, hey, I'm Paula and I live next door to this place. But you can't actually require them to tell you, one, where they're from, or what their name is. And that goes back to old cases. There's examples where one time a victim of domestic violence was found by their abuser through minute meetings, or minutes, so that's not great. And another one was a school district where it led to retaliation against the person's child. So again, one of those things where it's more based on the public hearing is to hear from the public. So it's not really who it's from, it's just the comment that they're offering. So a lot of times people ask us like, hey, if they don't live in our community, like why should they be able to do this? But again, it doesn't necessarily matter. They might work in your community and spend a lot of time there. They might actually be impacted from it because they're a neighboring municipality, but it's like within 500 feet of, it's a development happening in another municipality. It probably, if it's generating a lot of traffic, it might have an impact on them too. So again, you can ask them to provide it. A lot of times you say like, you know, we're gonna take it by number, and you say like, okay, we're now serving number 2, like, and you get your 3 minutes to make your, you know, your comment, and then we move on in, you know, with number 4 and whatever. Yes.
Can you make them sign in?
So you can make them sign in, but they don't have to give you like their name if they don't want to.
Oh, well, they wouldn't be signing in then, would they?
Yeah, so I can say, I guess I would say, maybe they would put some kind of identifier or something in that case. I know, this is a weird one because I think a lot of times people just do. Like, the city of Albany is out of compliance with this one because they require you to register to be part of the, like, their zoo, which I'm like, that's not how statute is. But again, unless you're challenged on your crazy regulations, there's plenty of places that do things the wrong way. But try to do the best you can. So you can say like, you know, they might use, you know, they could obviously come up as like Bob Smith and just write down Bob Smith. And, I mean, who are you to question it, right?
So how would your minutes reflect then? Person A came and spoke
Right.
about the fact that they didn't like this, or they thought this was the best thing since.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
And the next one could be John Jones, because John wants to give his name.
yeah,
Yeah.
All right.
basically.
Yeah.
I mean, basically you can't require it, but you can ask them to provide it, so.
Yeah, it's up to them. All right, so moving on to hearing notice requirements. The state law requires that public hearings are posted in your newspaper of general circulation at least 5 days prior to the hearing. The notice should be mailed to the applicant and involved parties. If you're within 500 feet of a state park or parkway, the regional or state park commission should be notified. If you need to go to the county under 239M, which I'm going to cover more in another slide, so I'm not going to say much now. So then it will need to go to the county for review, or under 239NN, which is what we call the nice neighbor law, it may need to go to your neighboring municipality if it's within that 500-foot border. And then if the municipality adopts requirements to mail to neighbors, they are bound by those requirements, but that is not in the state law. Our recommendation for neighbors is to post a sign like what you see in this image here. It makes people aware of what's going on, and it doesn't require making sure you send it out to every individual who might be interested in knowing. They can see for themselves if it's something that they come across, like their next door neighbor's house, on a regular basis.
So we say that especially because a lot of times these go to the property owner, but if the property owner is renting to a tenant, the tenant might actually be the one that's impacted by whatever proposal, but they might not be the one that actually hears about the hearing or knows that there's something going on in the neighborhood. So this is where public notice, like a sign on the property can be super helpful. I'll say, I usually pick on the city of Albany a lot, but I pay taxes there, it's allowed, right? But I will say they're pretty good about actually putting signs out. They also include like a QR code to the online meeting as well, so you can actually watch as well, so. But it just kind of gives people like a flag as to something's going on here, and I might want to just look on the website to understand it a little bit better. Yes?
Official newspaper.
Oh, yeah.
We're
Oh,
just
yeah,
talking
this
about
was the
this
topic,
week.
this is the topic of our 10 a.m. staff meeting. Yes, official meeting. What's your
Yeah.
question?
Well, I think that's hard to find,
Yeah,
and then what defines an official newspaper?
so it has to be designated in your local law as your newspaper general circulation. It doesn't have to necessarily be the one, we were talking about this a lot on Monday, so I'll also feel free to jump in if I don't say something we talked about. But it doesn't have to necessarily be like a local newspaper in your town. It could be a regional newspaper, like in our area, that could be the Times Union, or what is it, the Troy Record, which is, I guess, also the City of Troy's newspaper. So it doesn't have to be that specific. I mean, some people were bringing up to us, last week I was at Seneca Falls presenting, and they don't have a local newspaper, and they're asking about putting it in the penny saver. The statute doesn't say you can, but it's supposed to be a newspaper that you're subscribed to and paying for, so that doesn't necessarily qualify to meet the statute, but it's really what will best reach your members of your community. And again, I don't know, is it the after dark where we can say, is anyone really?
Is that what you're Yeah. So I think one, we say like this is what's required in statute. So we basically tell people like, you know, unfortunately there's a lot of places in like, you know, rural Seneca, rural, you know, Ontario County that are using like the Rochester newspaper. And it's like, are people really reading the Rochester newspaper in that community? Maybe not. But unfortunately, this is how it's written in statute. So until the state legislature loosens it up and decides, hey, maybe we should take on, the digital age, unfortunately, this one stays. But we get this question everywhere we go. Why do we have to do this? Like, are they ever going to change this? And if you don't like doing it, I mean, the thing that I often say is like, it's something worth talking to your assembly and senator about, is that it could make it a little bit easier for probably your clerk too, because they're probably dealing with it. But as it's written, it's the official newspaper. So I think our colleague used to say in Albany at one year, it was like the diocesan or something. It was like one of the like religious ones was like the official newspaper at one point. So, but again, it's a subscriber, so they used it as that point, and they kind of passed it around over the years to give everybody a little bit of action. But yeah, it's difficult, especially if you're in a rural place and like local media is really struggling. Like this is a hard one to do.
Yeah, but it's a good question, and like we said, we get it a lot, but. So going back, I mentioned this in the previous slide, but 239N, the nice neighbor law, this encourages I'm looking at it here, sorry, it's late for me. Encourages municipalities to communicate with one another about applications that could have an impact beyond municipal borders. So the idea here is for your municipality to send the application to the town clerk of your neighboring municipality. They should share that with the local governing board and other local officials and representatives to ensure that each other know what's going on in each other's municipalities. And if you want to go to that public hearing, you can go and comment on whatever project is being proposed, and that the municipality needs to let them know at least 10 days before the public hearing. And then General Municipal Law 239M, so this is the one you're probably most familiar with, which is M for mandatory. Applications need to be sent to the county if they are 500 feet from municipal boundaries, a state or county park, a highway, stream, or state building. And then farm operations applying for area variances for farm-related activities in a state ag district are exempt from this. But failing to refer could be deemed a procedural deficit if challenged in court, and the entire action may be overturned. However, for adoption or amendment of zoning, the statute of limitations is 6 years, so after that period, they can no longer challenge that.
Okay, so for this one, this is important as you as planning and zoning board members. When you're working on your comp plan, your governing board has no idea what the heck GML 239M is. But as part of them adopting your comprehensive plan or updating your municipality-wide zoning, they have to refer it to the county before they can make their decision. So don't skip this step because it is, at least in terms of the legislative side of it, it actually extends, they can go back, people aggrieved by the decision can still challenge it for 6 years. That is not the case for like a site plan review or special use permit or subdivision, but it is important because one, you don't want to be, it's like the slam dunk. If somebody is upset with something that you approved and you didn't refer it, it's the easiest way to invalidate your actions. But also, it's one that I think it gets skipped a lot. So you just want to be aware that it's there. So that's why we always say like having that kind of like a map shaded out already, knowing that if a project falls within that shaded area, you already know, okay, we have to send it to the county before we can even make our final decision here. So, but definitely the governing board, like they don't know about this. So when it's comp plans and zoning, make sure that they're sending it to the county before you move forward.
All right, so county recommendation. So after reviewing the application, the county can make a recommendation to the referring body with authority over the approval of the application. The county planning department is not a regulatory body and has no authority to make the final decision. That's up to you as the board. But there are types of responses that the county can give. So one is no jurisdiction. So that means that the action actually has no say in from the county's approval. Incomplete, they should let you know this as soon as possible, but they may tell you that the application that they received does not have all the information that they need to make their decision. So that's a possibility. They can also deem it as a local concern, which is somewhat similar to no jurisdiction. The idea there is that, again, the county isn't really gonna need to have a say in the matter. It's up to you as the local body to make that decision. They can also say a local concern with comments. So the county might find that the matter has some intermunicipal impacts or regional concern, but it will be minimal, so they might provide you with some comments to consider when approving that application. They can also give you a conditional, so the county finds that the matter has significant concern, namely that some aspect of a proposal will have a substantial adverse effect. The county provides conditions that must be met before the request can be granted. And then they can also fully deny the application if they determine that it has a full adverse effect on the county or regional area. This, I don't think happens very often. I don't know if you can speak to that, but.
No, and you can override the county with a supermajority anyway. So if they say denial, like you say, no, we really want to move forward with this, it just means that you need to vote with a supermajority. So if your board is 5, that means you have to have 4 to override the county's vote. I think a lot of times, most likely, the nice part about county referrals, a lot of municipalities don't have professional planning staff. So sometimes the only professional planner that might be looking at it is when you do refer it to a county. So a lot of times, especially when it's coming to adopting your comp plan or your zoning, they're gonna take a look at it and say, you know, maybe you're missing something that everybody else around you is doing, and they might send back some informal comments to you saying, hey, you know, your neighbor is dealing with this, you might wanna consider, you know, adding that to your municipality, or maybe they'll notice like, hey, your definitions are a little wacky, like it might be helpful to go back and tighten something up, or, you know, your measurements are a little bit off or something. So a lot of times it's the opportunity to have that professional staff take a look at it, which is nice. I don't think a lot of municipalities override the county for the most part. I don't think a lot of the counties take a lot of denials either. Though I've had an experience, weirdly enough, I think I was in Broome County, where they took a hard-line stance on a Starbucks that didn't have enough pedestrian access to the bike trail that it was sitting next to, and they pushed for denial, and I was surprised, but the applicant actually came back and said, you know what, we want to make this work, so what do we have to do to make it work? And they went back and modified the site plan, and everybody ended up going home happy. So again, kind of up to you. You guys have a planning board, a county planning board. Not about half the counties, I think, still do. So some counties, it's a planner themselves doing the review. So like, if you forget to do this, and sometimes you're like, I have a meeting and we're gonna make a decision. Sometimes they're willing to turn it around pretty fast for you, but since you have a planning board, unfortunately, it's probably figuring out the right timing. So sometimes that means you can't make a decision for another 30 days because you gotta wait to hear back from them before you go forward. So planning boards and zoning boards can't act until you hear back from the county. So the county has 30 days to make their decision, and then if they get back to you on like the 32nd day, and it's still before your next meeting, you still have to consider what they have to say. It's like this 2-day rule, so as long as it's before, you get it back before your next meeting, take it into account. And also, if it's something that's really complicated, you can definitely agree to extend that review period by agreement of both parties. But, just try to always send that out. And like, if you have a question, you're not quite sure, we always like to say, what did we have a colleague that used to say, if in doubt, send it out. But also you can just pick up the phone and call your county planners. They're like a source of help for you anyway, and it's good to have a good relationship with them anyway, and them have an idea of what the development pressures are in your community anyway. So again, if you're not quite sure, just pick up the phone and give Andy a call and say, hey, we have this going on, do we need to actually send this over to you or not? And most likely he's gonna turn around the answer and let you know. So keep that in mind, that they're here to kind of help you through this process too. Then your decisions have to be based on a record, so they should be made within 62 days after the close of the public hearing if you have that. That's required for special use permits and for subdivisions, but it's not required by statute for site plan review, but a lot of municipalities do include public hearings as part of that, so up to your own regulations. The minutes should contain the record of each vote, so who voted and how they voted. Include any language of motions made and conditions that are passed. Try to make those conditions really easy for your code enforcement official or zoning enforcement official to go back and make sure that the applicant is holding up their end of the bargain before they sign off on things like certificates of occupancy. Send the copy of the decision with the findings to the applicants, and if you had to refer it to the county, you actually have to do one step further, which is letting the county know how it turns out. So if you supermajority and override their recommendation, you have to let them know, but also if you're in agreement, you also have to let them know. So it's just kind of give them an idea of however the application turned out. And then boards should support their decisions with findings, and findings are an analysis that applies your local laws to facts on the matter that lead to conclusions. So it's, how did the person fail the use variance test, or how did they maybe fail the area variance, some of the problems of that test, but how you're finding the balance and letting them go forward. And then the findings should definitely describe reasons for an application's denial or approval, and it's the first thing that the courts are going to look at if you do get challenged. And most likely, every municipality gets challenged. Sometimes it's a surprise on what you get challenged on, but usually it happens. So doing a good job with your findings and your decisions and being clear about how they're upholding your regulations, how they're meeting your regulations or not, is really helpful if you do get challenged. And then it will also support why you're imposing certain conditions on a land use approval or denial. And then, of course, enforcement, which is the hardest part of the whole damn thing, is your governing board authorizes your code and zoning enforcement officer to make those original zoning determinations. They also enforce your approvals and your conditions that are granted by the planning and zoning board, so be clear about those conditions because they're the ones that have to go back and make sure that they're doing it. They are often sometimes the first person that they're talking to, an applicant's talking to as well, so it's good to understand how that works in your process, or it might be a clerk if you're lucky to have one of those, or maybe it's your municipal clerk that they're talking to. The zoning board or the zoning enforcement officer will determine project zoning compliance, and then that kind of starts the story of maybe you go to the zoning board, maybe you actually have to, if you're here for site plan review, maybe it goes to the planning board instead. Usually the enforcement piece is usually in your zoning law itself, or usually in a statement of their duties. And require approval of your conditions be met to the extent practicable before you issue any certificate of occupation or completion. It's your leverage, but of course there's gonna be times where like nobody's gonna like pour a concrete, sidewalk in, January in Watertown, New York. So sometimes we actually allow them and push forward with that. You just make sure that you go back in the spring and make sure that they actually poured it when it was appropriate. And then I've already mentioned it, but the Article 78, so board's decisions do not go to the governing board for appeals. They are appealed to the state Supreme Court, which is the lowest court in New York, in an action known as an Article 78. These challenges have to be made within 30 days of the date that the decision was filed in the clerk's office, so it's good to know what filing means in your community. Is it a date stamp? Is it putting it in somebody's basket on your way out the door at night? Timestamps are kind of the best. Commencement of it should stay all proceedings, so that's important for the enforcement official. It kind of puts a stay, so we take a pause while it works its way through the court system. And then the court can reverse, affirm, or modify a decision, or send it back to you to reconsider. Finally, we talked a little bit before about some of the planning and zoning funding that exists out there. So the smart growth grants are good for planning or for comp plan and zoning updates. The local waterfront revitalization program can be used kind of for comp plans through those plans are kind of like comp plan adjacent. If you work with other municipalities, you may be able to use the local government efficiency, shared services money in our office. So if you're like a town and you have a village and you're gonna do like a joint comp plan or a joint zoning code, since there is working together aspect of it, it does qualify under our grants. Then there's the DEC Climate Smart Communities grants, and then Ag and Markets has the Farmland Protection grants, and that's for $25,000 for the agricultural component of your comprehensive plan, which if you're a small agricultural community, it's probably gonna cover the cost of your comp plan, and that one is with rolling applications, so that's cool. And finally, where you can find us. We're here essentially for you, and thank you for coming for training tonight. And if you have any additional questions, we're happy to answer them, or if you want to chat with us afterwards, we're happy to do that as well. But thank you for your service to your communities. We know it is thankless and difficult in a lot of places, and sometimes controversial. You think to yourself, why am I doing this at night? But we appreciate what you're doing for your communities, and like I said, if you have bumps in the road and you don't know what to do, feel free to reach out to us. We're here to help. So thanks again for coming for training, and hopefully we'll see you again soon, maybe in the spring, and if not, we'll be at Tug Hill for sure. So we'll see you there if you go to that conference.
Right on.
Yeah. Good times. I'm like ready for dinner.
Thank you for coming. Your certificates are on